Video, I'm going to show you how I make my spirals, and these are the tools I need. I'm going to make it for 1-inch marble. I have my assorted alligator clips. I have a 6-foot piece of stainless steel wire. I have another piece of wire that I'll be using for the intake and the exit tracks when I'm finished with the spiral. I have a small coil here that I'll be cutting for my spacers. I use acetone to clean my steel. I used to use lacquer thinner, but this evaporates faster and seems to take care of the oils better. My pipe, this is a 1 1/4 inch pipe, and this is what I use to get my coil. And of course, this is what I use for my acetone. And last but not least, my trusty bolt cutters. These are 14-inch, and they work really well for cutting the spacers or anything else that I need cut. Okay, let's start by bending up our spiral. I like to leave 4, 5, 6 inches or so here so that I have some extra wire to work with when I'm dealing with the exit track. So let's go ahead and just start bending this up. And this initial circle can be as big or as small as you want. The most critical part of this operation is keeping the wire as smooth circle as you can. Now, you may not always get it exactly perfect, but as close as you can is probably good enough. And this looks a little bit, there's a little bit too much space here. Let's tighten that up a little bit. And if you're unsure about your spacing, you can always check your ball, your marbles, and that's too big. So let's tighten that up a bit. Let's see how that is. And that's a lot better. Okay, let's go ahead and bend up the rest of this. Don't worry about making your initial bends absolutely perfectly. When we're finished with the spiral here, we will go back and adjust it, make sure that everything is even. Right now we're just getting it into shape. Alright, we'll leave a little bit of a length sticking out for our entrance so we can attach another track to the side of that. Now at this point, when you have this, you want to look at your sculpture and look and see, do you need it to come in this way and go out that way, or the way it is now, in here, out here. This is the time when you want to look at where you're going to be installing it and make those adjustments accordingly. So let's say we want to go in and out the same direction. So I'm going to open this up a little bit Or I could close this up a little bit if I don't want to waste the wire and would like the spiral bigger, and I can open this up. Okay, there's our start of our spiral. The next step is to look and make sure it looks pretty even. And it looks all right. Let's see. Go ahead and reshape this a little bit. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now the next step is the most important step, and the one that you, as an RBS maker, will appreciate the most. Okay, the next step is we're going to need to weld on our spacers. And if you've ever tried making a spiral, you know that it's very difficult to keep everything from moving around on you, to keep the spacing correct, the same, and consistent. It was a very big challenge for me when I first started making spirals. So what I have some aluminum combs. These are spaced for my 1-inch marbles at 800 thousandths, which would be just over 3/4 of an inch, 50 thousandths over. And what these do is they keep the spacing the same. Let's put those in the slots here, like that. Put another one over the top and hold it in. Let's use our clamp and hold that in place. And then do this on 2 other sides. And try to split it up into thirds. Let's put the last set on. Like that. As you can see, you get good spacing. You can adjust it a little bit for your depth, but mostly that's going to be done when you bend the spiral. The tighter you bend your spiral, the taller it's going to be, and the looser or more open that you bend it, the more flat your spiral can be. And that's going to just take some practice as you do some to kind of get a feel for it. So here we go. Let's turn this over. I'll get out one of my trusty aluminum blocks here. And that one's too big. Let's go for something smaller. Oops. And we just want to keep this. up. Oh, there it goes again. Let's put it on the side. Okay, so you want to move this around until you get into a comfortable position. I have lots of little aluminum cutoffs that I use to hold things up. They work great. They're all spaced exactly, depending on their size. And they work really well. Let's go ahead and get that about where we want it. Now we need spacers. So here I have my coil already made up. But you may ask yourself, how do I get this coil? Let me show you. Okay, I make my spacers by wrapping them around a pipe. You see I have a hole in my workbench here, a well-used hole. I have my pipe, it also has a hole in it. I put the wire to the workbench, put it also into the hole in the pipe, and then twist. This is a 1 1/4 inch pipe. I have lots of different sizes for different size spirals, and different size coils, depending on the size of the spacer I need. Let's just bend this whole piece up. So these are spacers. You don't have to worry about the spacing, making it even. They're all going to be cut into pieces. Okay, now that we have our coil bent up, we want to go ahead and cut spacers. And we'll just eyeball this. The first spacer that will go from this wire to this wire, your smallest spacer. Let's go ahead and just give it a little cut. We'll make a few more. Looks like we need 2 more. Let's cut those 2. Okay, I'm now ready to weld my spacer on. Here's my first spacer and my alligator clips. We'll go right here. I use a TIG welder with a high frequency start, so I don't need to scratch start. But what's important is that your tungsten be sharp and clean, because you're going to want to have a nice clean weld without any interference from your spark going the wrong way. So let's go ahead and weld this on. And you can see I split up these the aluminum combs here. So instead of being sandwiched, they're both on the bottom pointing up. I needed a little extra space here to keep the spacing correct. So for the first set, it doesn't really matter how on you are. You want to just make sure your spacing is correct, and you can adjust it afterwards, which is what I recommend. So let's go ahead and get the first line of spacing on, and I'll show you what I mean. I'll use these pliers to make sure that the spacer is contacting the track. If not, sometimes the stainless can ball up and it won't join to the other piece that you're trying to weld it to. It can be very frustrating. By using some needle nose, I can hold this in place, and I know that there's good mechanical contact, meaning that the stainless should flow to itself and I shouldn't have any problems with the weld. Okay, there's the first one. Let's add the other 2. Okay, they're welded to the tracks. Now let's weld the spacers here and here to each other. Okay, now that we have one set of spacers welded on, let's take everything off. And now we want to look and make any adjustments. So as you can see, it's a little flat here on this end. Doesn't look too bad. So here, once you get the first set on, it's easy to make adjustments. To lift it, to move it. Make sure you've got a pretty good looking spiral here. And we can make some adjustments to this. We'll bend it around a bit, get it good. And that doesn't look bad. So let's leave it like that. I'll put another comb here. Another on top. Keep it in place. Clamp it. Apply the ground clamp. Get some electricity. Alright, not bad. Let's add a spacer here just to make sure everything stays in place. Okay, and we are ready to start on our second set of clips. These are pretty difficult welds to do. You may have problems with them. But as with anything in life, practice, practice, practice. Okay, that's set number 2. Let's move on to our last set of spacers. Alright, we're all welded up. Still pretty hot from the welds. Let's collect our spacers. We won't need these anymore. Put those off to the side. The blocks as well. And we'll use this opportunity while it's hot to use a wire brush. We'll clean it off. Okay, our next order of business will be to add our entrance track and our exit track. And let's start with the entrance. So I'm going to go all the way back to the spacer here. So I'm just going to kind of roll this on the bench to give me an idea. I'm going to leave it long. Cut it a little bit long here. Okay. Most importantly, you want there to be a very smooth transition going from this piece of wire we're going to add, and when it contacts the spiral, it's not very smooth. You'll hear a little bit of a click. It may not be a big deal, but I just like it to be smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and start with giving this a little bit of curve here. We'll get it. We just need it close to what we want. It doesn't need to be exact. So let's put some more in there. Lay it on here and see. We need to do some more shaping. Oh, that's too much. That's too little. And I'm trying to bend at the end of a piece of wire. I find it's very helpful to have some pliers to hold on to. If you're trying to hold this with your fingers, it's difficult or impossible. So that looks pretty close. So let's go ahead and start with our first weld. Let's turn this over. And we're going to weld this track right here to the spacer. It doesn't really matter where it goes. You're going to make adjustments to it after we get it welded in. So we'll put our wire there. You can see there I have it. Right there in the spacer here. And we're going to weld it right into this little armpit here. To our ground. Hold it in place. And weld it in place. Okay, there you have it. See it welded right onto there. Now let's make some adjustments to it. And let's finish the curve that we need. Okay, this is what it looks like. I want there to be a little more of a bump there. So I'm going to go ahead and squeeze that up. Bend the wire down. Until we have what looks like a nice transition. And we will know when we test it. Yeah, very smooth. I don't feel or hear any clicking or it transfers from this track to the spiral, so I think we're good. Now I'm going to go ahead and use a couple alligator clips to hold this track in place here. And this is a very critical weld on the back. We're going to apply a weld right here between to join these two tracks. So this track, now that we know it's where it should be, can't move. Move it back to our ground. And for this weld, zoom in here. So for this weld, I like to use a little bit of fill wire. And I use a 1/16 Use a 1/16 wire for fill for my 1/8 inch. Seems to work very nicely. So let's put it right there. We'll apply the weld. Okay, go back out. Now we've got 2 welds. We welded the wire here at the spacer. We made a nice curve and we welded those 2 together. And still very smooth. You did a good job. So let's go ahead and finish our curve here. Okay, now the spacing inside your spiral is most likely going to be a little smaller than maybe the spacing you use on your actual sculpture. And what I use, I don't use any clamps. My track clamps here, I don't use any clamps for these, so we're just going to go ahead and eyeball it once again. Make sure we have it about where we want it. Make some last minute adjustments here and make everything look nice and even. And we're going to apply a spacer back here. And that should keep everything in place. Let's use this, hook it up to our ground. We have our spacer. And let's apply that to our track. Now, I've never welded mild steel. I've only welded stainless, and I know that they say stainless balls up more than mild steel. Mild steel seems to flow more. So once again, you saw me use my needle nose. It's always good to keep a good mechanical connection, and when you don't have any problems with your weld, you won't have to go back and redo it. It just makes it easier. So now that's our entrance track. And it needs a little shaping. It's a bit hot, so let's make that a little less severe of a bank. And we'll look down that and make sure it's nice and straight. And it's too wide. Alright, so in the case of a spacer that's too wide, take my channel locks and we'll just squeeze that guy together. That looks much better. Alright, so far so good. Now let's do our exit track. It's very, very important that you do the entrance and the exit track before you install the spiral, because you can move it in any direction. You can clean it before it's put on there, and you can have these tracks already on before you put it on your sculpture. So let's move on to our exit track. Okay, I have my wire cut for my exit, and I'm going to go to this spacer, and it's always good to add some curve to it first. And it's tighter on the inside, so we'll get our pin tight. We'll eyeball that, and that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and take this end. Let's look at that again. I need to go this way. Okay, you can see I put a little kink in the end of the curve here, and that is going to be used here. So when I put my track on, it can still contact the spiral, and it's curved up to meet with the spacers. Not critical. You can use a straight piece if you want, but I find this sort of works easier. So I got that in place. Let's attach our ground, and let's make that piece permanent. Okay, there you go. And that's what I've done with it. You can see that little kick is there welded to the spacer, and we have a nice curve here. So let's adjust that. I need to open it. Since it's hot, I'll use my pliers. I'm going to open that a little bit, make it match the curvature of the spiral. And let's bend the rest of this to match the diameter of the track we already have. Now at this point, you can see that the ball right now is going to hit this spacer sticking out here on the end. So let's adjust everything and get it away from that spacer. We'll make this a little tighter. Let's not kink that. Curve that. Now you can move the track up and push it up. So the track is up against the spacer. Of course, the ball is going to follow the track. And let's give that a little more of a curve here. Okay. So it feels like a pretty smooth transition. Let's open that a little. Yep, that's good. Misses the edge of the spacer here. Let's open, and let's just bend this so it matches that. It's a little bit too wide. Let's adjust it some more. Okay, that's not bad. So let's do what we did before, but we're going to go ahead and weld onto that spacer. So we're going to weld right here in between this armpit here, between the wire we've added and a spacer that's already there, to make sure that we continue to have a good mechanical contact, and use my trusty alligator clip to hold it together. Ground clamp on, and we'll put that there, the block there, so it holds it up, and let's make that weld. Okay, and there's our exit track. We've now made that weld, and that holds this piece in perfectly so it can't move. Now, if for some reason you find that once you've made the weld, you've made a mistake, and you hear some noise or it's not very smooth, you can take that bottom track and you can just push it in and out just a little bit and sort of adjust it to make it, to give it a very smooth transition. And that's what you want, is a smooth transition. So I still hear a little bit of a click there. Let's adjust that in a little more. Yeah, that's That's better. Okay, so this is still wide. Now that this track cannot move, we'll have to adjust from this track. We're going to open that up, give it a little bit of a curve. And you know, it still looks like it touches that spacer just a little bit. But never fear, we have a grinder. Let's go ahead and put our spacer on. Keep that track exactly where it should be, the right spacing. You can even check it from the back side. Let's close it up a little bit. That looks pretty good. Take our coil, cut our spacer, and let's weld it on. Okay, we had this little spacer weld right here is sort of in the way. Well, not sort of, it is. You can hear it click along past it. So let's take our trusty Dremel and grind that off. Okay, now we have that ground. And now you don't hear that sound. Alright, everything looks good. Let me give it a final cleaning and I'll show you the final step. Okay, here's our spiral. Very nice. It enters smoothly and exits smoothly, and that's what you want, so that it remains one single track. And that final step I told you about is to grind off the ends flat. So when you go to install it, and you have this inside your sculpture and you realize that these still have cut ends, you won't have to mess with it. You can sand off the end of the wire that's going to be continuing the track, butt it right up to it and make that weld, and you won't have to worry about getting your grinder in there. So there it is. That's how I make a spiral. I make them bigger, taller, deeper, any which way, but I use all those same basic steps to achieve the spirals that I make. And this spiral I can see will end up in a future desktop. Thank you very much for listening to my DVD, and I would hope that if you have any questions or anything extra that maybe I haven't answered, you can give me, just send me an email, which I'll have listed right there on the video. Alright, so just to recap, I use an 800,000th spacer for my 1-inch marbles, and for my larger marbles that I use a 1 3/8 ball, either a mini cue ball or a marble, and with those I use a 1-inch spacing on my spirals.